So this is Steve Balton, and I am very, very, very excited to talk to JD Andrew and Billy Bob Thornton about your Boxmasters. And dude, congratulations, you guys, on the wonderful new record, Light Rays. And it's funny because I'm used to doing multiple podcasts, so I'm starting in that area. But this is obviously a NAMM thing. I also like the fact that we're doing Believe in Music, and the last song on the record is "I Gotta Try," you gotta try, which has such an uplifting, upbeat thing. So I feel like that's a good place to start talking about the idea of Believe in Music. And it's a really interesting thing because in 2020, I feel like for a lot of artists, it's been very important to deliver a positive message when things have been so negative. So was that part of the mindset of "you got to try"?
Well, actually, the song is about someone who became famous or had an easy way to go because of the way they looked. And so, in other words, let's say it's a musician or actor, or novelist, whatever, who was very popular from a very young age because some one of the suits, said, "Hey, we'll make a star out of this kid," you know, because they have the look. And then once their light stopped shining, they, since they were used to being given everything, they never worried about the artistic or creative part of it. They, made it just on their look or the fashion of it. And so once that bubble bursts, then if you really love this stuff, if you love music or whatever it is, whatever field you're in, then you got to think about that. You have to do it for the thing itself. And if you want to get your light back, then you got to try. You can't rely on, once the face goes or whatever, you can't rely on that anymore. So you got to try the actual thing that you were well known for or that you were successful at. And so you got to try is really about somebody telling this guy, look, you're all bummed out that you live out in the, by the alley in the valley, and, you're sort of doom and gloom about everything now, but there are a lot of people who don't make it that way. And there is a person trying to tell them that. It's like you actually have to do something to earn this. Your light was shining because of who you were and not what you did. And so that's what the song is actually about. But yes, it is, as usual with our songs, there's always even when it's an uplifting sounding song, sometimes there are darker undertones to it. So that's the case in that song.
Yeah, and just to say, we didn't plan on the world being the way it was, when we recorded this record. We did it just about a year ago, and things were different then. This was just a record that we were making that was kind of our using a specific period of time, specifically like 1967 to 1969, as kind of our touchstone for making this record. All of our records they'll start with some sort of influence, and then they'll take that and use that kind of as its guide. So this was a record that, just had kind of a handle on this era that we were going for, and we were using a certain, set of instruments and sounds that we were going for. And when it came time to kind of pick a record, because we always have a few other ones ready to go, so when it was time to release a record and get ready for a tour that ended up not happening, it just made sense that this would be the record we put out. And yes, some of the songs do have a more uplifting and hopeful message, and honestly, it seems very appropriate now that these are the songs we're talking about.
Well, but see, there's so many directions to go in with that, and we're going to come on to the instruments then and what you use to create the sound from that era. But one of the things that's really interesting, Billy, you were talking about how the songs have, you know, the darker undertones under the uplifting sound, and I go back to, I mean, I think no one really did that better than the Beatles did with Help, which is, you know, this happy, you hear that song when you're 5, 6 years old, you hear it as this upbeat, poppy, jangly, just feel good song. And then I remember seeing U2 do it in the 80s where they redid it in this really somber way. And you realize, holy shit, that's a song about suicide. It's this incredibly desperate song. And I think that that juxtaposition works so well for so many artists. And it's interesting. So for both of you then, are there sort of reference points that you look at for those people who, or even when you look at, you know, I mean, when you take it from, you know, the Beatles to John Lennon solo stuff, and you look at, you know, some of his protest songs like Instant Karma or, you know, Power to the People, which are these like feel good sing along things, but have such a pointed message. So for both of you, are there songs that are sort of touchstones that do that well, that juxtaposition, because it's such an effective tool in music?
Well, absolutely. You know, there are people who like, you know, John Prine's songs. I was very close with John, and we would talk about songwriting a lot. And Christopherson, guys like that, who don't necessarily have Christopherson's songs that are dark sound dark, you know. But John has those, you know, John would have songs that actually sounded kind of goofy that were really heavy, you know. And so he's someone I always admired, and that was someone that I studied a lot. But the Beatles are a great example, and Help is a perfect example. You know, that absolutely, I mean, we're hugely influenced by the British invasion, and particularly the Beatles. And here, sort of, you know, Southern California pop, like, you know, like the Byrds and people like that, you know. And a lot of those bands, you know, had songs that sounded, you know, like pop songs, and yet they did have darker themes. But the one you brought up, Help, I just heard it yesterday on the Beatle channel in the car. And I was actually thinking about that. And right after that, Cold Turkey came on. And Cold Turkey it's kind of got an abrasive sound to it, you know, so it works very well for what the theme was. But I mean, when I was younger and I first heard Cold Turkey, before I knew what that was about, it was kind of like, what is it, a Thanksgiving song? They don't even have Thanksgiving in England, you know? But so, yeah, I mean, the Beatles are a great example of that. I think they did it a lot. I mean, McCartney, probably not as much. John Lennon did quite a bit of that. Whereas, you know, McCartney had a lot of songs. I think I read a quote by somebody involved at the organization one time that some of McCartney's songs were just about making a cup of tea, or, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. You know, he had a lot of those, you know, When I'm 64 and, you know, things like that. But he also wrote some heavy songs too, you know, and they're both great songwriters. But I think Lennon more so had, you know, a sort of darker vibe to his stuff. And, you know, he said himself that, you know, we have a song that is sort of newer and a theme for a record that we're doing. And the record is called Nothing Personal, and every song on the record is very personal. And a lot of times in songwriting, they say, don't say I or me or mine or whatever, you know, and because people, almost as an insult, they'll say, well, that's a really nice song. It's very personal, you know. And John Lennon said, I don't write about anybody but me, you know, because I don't know anything about anybody else. I only know about me. So that's who I write about. And so we did a thing just to sort of like drive that point home, and did a whole record of songs that are all about that. And of course, George Harrison had the song I, Me, Mine. I mean, you know, and that was about another subject. But, you know,
Sure,
darkness provides a lot of inspiration for songs.
What's funny, I was going to say, I had never heard that quote before, but it's, you know, because one of my favorite John Lennon songs of all time, and I consider probably the bravest song ever written, is God, you know, where the whole thing is I. And I say it's the bravest song ever written because I've written a lot about John Lennon. And look, when you look at an artist coming out of the Beatles and saying, I don't believe in the Beatles, I don't believe in any of this, now it's just Yoko and me. I mean, as I've said before, there literally is no contemporary thing that can come close to it. There's no way that could ever be measured in contemporary terms, because it's the most, look at what he did. So I like that, though, because again, I hadn't heard the quote. And so when you go through the whole thing and it's that's kind of a big statement.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about it. But it's like, if you don't use those things, you have to use you, because if you don't do that and you're not using I or me or mine, then you're writing a song about some guy, like, that lived down the road, and it becomes a story song or whatever, and Curtis Lowe, for instance, you know what I mean, by Leonard Skinner, Ballad of Curtis Lowe, but still very personal because it was a guy they knew, but when you're writing from that perspective, it's you can only do so many songs that way before it's like, oh wow, this is a novel about some character. But if you look out throughout rock and roll history, I mean, it wasn't called, Brad wants to hold your hand.
A perfect example of kind of having it's not exactly a darker lyric, but with a poppy song, is the first song, the single Breathe Easy off of our new record, Light Rays. That's a song that, before we really wrote the music for it, Billy sent me the lyrics for it. And as I read them, just as, a poem, I'm a father, Billy's got kids too. And it's, he wrote the song, for his daughter. And I read the lyric and was just, crying. It was the first time I've ever, just read a lyric that Billy sent me, and it really hit me emotionally like that. Usually I'm just like, wow, that's very dark and personal and, yeah, that's, something cool. But this one, was a very emotional lyric, but then, the music we took in a more up-tempo poppy direction. And so if we did it slow and brooding and, really made it so that the vocal was like way out front and big and in your face, then it might, affect people a different way than the way we did it. We just, want the songs to make you feel good, at the same time, have a lot of meaning and weight behind them. It's we write a lot of music, and if every song was dark and fit the lyric, I don't know that we could keep making records. We would just kind of be too depressed to move.
Well, but I mean, it's also something to be said for it. Again, I mean, I do a show where I talk with artists about protest songs. And look, when you look at some of the greatest protest songs of all time, they're delivered in a message. And it's funny, I was talking with James Bay, and this came up with like Springsteen's Born in the USA. And it's like, when you look at how that song originally was delivered, it was delivered in a very Djangoistic sort of anthemy way that in fact was so catchy that everybody misinterpreted the song and had no idea what the hell it was about. So for you guys, talk about that idea of delivering the message in a way that is palatable. And it's like, eating healthy food. You give kids a bunch of vegetables. They're like, no. You put it on pizza, or you give them another way to do it. They're like, yeah, this is great. So it's putting that message in a way that is appealing to everyone.
Well, yeah, it's like I've always thought that it's better to sneak through the back door to educate people. Because if you make people want to listen to the song, if it sounds good to them, they're going to listen to it because of the song. And some people only listen for that. But ultimately, people who are interested in the lyrics are going to figure it out, and they will be educated by it after they've already grown to like the song, you see. So in other words, like, let's say you write a book called Racism. Racists aren't going to buy it if that's the name of the book. You know what I mean? I mean, there's no way. So if you, somebody who's lactose intolerant isn't going to, buy a vegan dessert that's called milky as hell or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's, I think it's a good way to do things, to get people to listen. And, but also for us, it just kind of comes naturally because we do like jangly pop, and we're so hooked on the 60s sound and everything that we tend to do that. Sometimes we'll bring a song in the studio that we had the idea was just going to be acoustic guitar and like bass pedals and some kind of creepy, mellotron sound or something like that with no drums or no guitars, something like that. No electric guitars. And we get in there, and the next thing you know, this really moody song has turned into She Loves You. you know, it's amazing how that happens. That just happened to us in the studio just the other day.
Well, it's interesting. So take me through, guys, for both you guys, some of the records that were the sort of the litmus records for Light Rays. And when you look at the period of 67 to 69, it's funny, even when you go to a song like Downy Girl, it has that story vibe of like a Jan and Dean from that era. Like it very much like fits in with that model of like, it's funny though, because actually Jan and Dean predates 67 to 69. It's a little earlier 60s,
Right.
but that sort of vibe. So for you guys, for both of you, and JD, if you want, we could start with you, that those first couple of records that really, and especially when it came to getting the sound of this, when you were looking with the instruments you put together, what were the sort of litmus records? Because I definitely hear some Birds in there. It's funny that you said being heavily influenced by British Invasion, because I hear a little bit of Tom Petty in there, which of course comes from the Birds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We loved the same artists growing up as, Petty and all the Heartbreakers did. But, we had just come off of making a record called Boxmaster 66. And so that was going to be the release that we put out next. And then we made Light Rays after our tour of 2019. Then we came home and we were excited to get in the studio, and we wrote a bunch more songs and made a whole nother record. And just, because we had done 66, we wanted to kind of, keep moving through the era and, just maybe do a few more things, production wise, that maybe they would have done a little later on. And so, at the core though, a bass, drums, guitars, it's, that's our core kind of influence, and that's what we play. And so, we always kind of start there and then kind of add things on. So this time we went to a studio, and we hadn't been able to get into A&M, which is where we normally record. And we went to this other studio called Barefoot, and they had a bunch of instruments laying around, and they had an old Vox Jaguar organ. And so, that's the sound of, stuff like 96 Tears, or, those kind of, or House of the Rising Sun, those records that we really loved. And so we just started putting that on there, and it just had such a cool thing that we've tried to get on other records before, but never with the exact, perfect kind of instrument. And it just, kind of led us down the road that we, let's put these things, and then we put some mellotrons on. We were borrowing a mellotron, one of the new mellotrons from a friend of ours. And so, we just love those sounds. And so we layer those in there. And so, and do a little bit of, vocal effects or vocal doubling, to try to get the sounds, the automatic double tracking that the Beatles used to do, and try to just use those production techniques a bit on stuff that we're doing that, makes us think. We aren't going back and listening to exact records. We're using our memory of what those records are from that era, and kind of letting that guide us more than just going back and trying to copy, something from the White Album or something. It's it's just letting our memory guide us, and kind of what do we remember about those records that we loved from that time. Take those and use that as our guide.
Well, sure. For every artist, obviously, it's like you'll have your influences, and it's funny because so much writing is subconscious anyway. So a lot of times you don't even realize the influences until they come out, and then you sort of figure out that okay, you're putting it in your own vision, because it's like you take a hodgepodge of, whether it's the Beatles and the Animals and Question and the Mysterians, or whatever it is, and you put it together into what becomes the Boxmaster sound. But it's funny because I think there's something about it too. It's that when you hear records when you're a kid, I've talked about this with people so much, those are the things that stick with you. Those are the things. It's like no one ever forgets the first time they fall in love, right? So when you hear a song when you're 14, there's something about it that resonates with you in a way that is so different for the rest of your life. So for you guys, as you went through and did this, where you sort of put together the memories, when you go back and listen to the album all the way through, now, are there things in there that kind of either surprise you a little bit, or you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that song in a long time. And then you remember that, oh shit, I really love 96 Tears, though I haven't probably listened to that in, 25 years.
Yeah. I mean, there's always something like we'll think of a song that it's like, oh, I want to get the sound of, like for a long time I was chasing the sound of the guitar on which song? Some Steppenwolf song.
Wasn't the Pusher, was it?
Maybe it was. Yeah, it was that rhythm guitar sound, and it was just so like bright and abrasive, but really cool. And it's like we're trying to get that sound, and so we're listening to it, and it's like, what do we have that'll make that sound? And then in the end, Billy knew John Kay and called him up and asked him, and it was nothing like we would ever, it's not anything we had laying around in the studio. There's like an old off-brand solid state amp and a guitar made out of 4 different guitars. So
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes then you just kind of use that, like, okay, I love that sound, let's try to get something that kind of sounds like that. So we're just we're always trying to find the sounds that make us think of songs. But at the same time, we write so much and record so much that we don't listen to many other things, and so it's just all the memories of certain songs that are guiding us, and then we just blast through recording all our stuff.
Yeah, it's exactly what you were saying a minute ago about these things being subconscious, because we know who we love and everything, but we don't go in there really saying, hey, let's make whatever, an Animals song or whatever like that. But, the things come through, and then later on, you can look back on it and go, hey, wait a minute, and we recently realized that JD and I are both fans of the Kinks and of Small Faces. And we didn't really realize how influenced we were by them until later. We look back on it, it's like, oh yeah, some of our stuff, especially like on this Boxmaster 66 record that's not out yet, not only the sounds of the Kinks, but sort of the mindset of the Kinks. Although JD and I don't punch each other in the face before we go on stage, but
we've only been together 14 years, but there's plenty of time.
but anyway, they would write thematic records and stuff sometimes, and we do that a lot, and just that sort of attitude. But it's like Paul McCartney had to tell John Lennon when he did Come Together that well, wait a minute, that's a Chuck Berry song, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but there's a Chuck Berry song that starts out exactly like the melody of the beginning of Come Together, and Paul McCartney told him, he said, we're going to have to kind of change that a little bit because it's exactly this Chuck Berry song. So it literally came out because John Lennon loved Chuck Berry so much, he just kind of wrote a song that he'd heard but wasn't aware of it, you know. And people, but you're gonna do that. I mean, there are only so many, chords and melodies. I mean, there's thousands of them, but still, you reach a point where these things do creep in, and the problem is all the great riffs, or a lot of the great riffs were figured out already. Because if you get on a guitar and you start playing these things, and it's like, I want to come up with a riff like Satisfaction. And you can't. I mean, that was done so long ago, because most of those riffs were very simple, but they were classic, and they've been taken. And so you don't hear like real hooky riffs that as much anymore, because unless somebody's kind of not playing the same riff, but capturing the spirit of something that they grew up loving, and sometimes I think it was Neil Young who said, he said, I've essentially been writing the same song for like 40 years or something like that, ripping himself off in a way, and Dewey Bunnell from America is proud that people said, hey, Horse with No Name sounds exactly like Neil Young, and we all thought it was Neil Young when it came on the radio in the beginning. But he doesn't shy away from talking about that. He's proud of the fact, he loved the guy.
Well, it's funny because speaking of like great riffs, and then you mentioned the Kinks, and so of course immediately I go to You Really Got Me, and then All Day and All the Night, and those things. But it's funny. So when you guys go back and listen to the record, all that, because I talk about this with people all the time, right? When you're making a record, you're immersed in it. You're in it. You're concentrating on it. You're feeling the moment. And it's only, like I was saying, when you go back and hear it and you hear the subconscious things that you're like, oh, okay, I hadn't noticed that. So it's funny that you say about, realizing you were bigger fans of the Kinks and Small Faces. So when you guys go back and hear this one or Boxmaster 66, which is not out yet, are there things that both of you hear in there that pleasantly surprise you?
Yeah. Well, one song on Boxmaster 66 is called Garage. And it's one of the things that I loved about it is that it got a little later influence in it. I mean, they came from somewhere in the 60s, but has a little Ramones to it. It's a very simple, song, like a 3-chord song or something. And it's just kind of repeating words a lot, but it's about a guy getting kicked out of his garage band when they were in his garage. And but there wouldn't have been a Ramones without the Who, and a lot of other people, along the way. I mean, people think that punk came along, in the late 70s or whatever, but punk had been around for a long time, because I think those guys, the Who, have a lot to do with the punk like bands that came along after them, and then going into the actual punk era. I think they were one of the seeds of that.
Sure. And then of course even in the late 60s, so then you get to the Stooges and the MC5 and all those,
Sure.
And the Velvet Underground, who weren't punk, but so yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting thing. I think for everyone, it's like, look, it's such an important thing of music. I got to interview Smokey Robinson a couple of times, and as he was saying, he's like, if you want to be a musician, he's like, you need to know where it came from. You need to know the history. And this goes back into what we were talking about at the beginning with You Gotta Try, and what you were saying. I really like that, because I talk about this with artists so much. There comes a point in period, especially when you've been in a band, like JD, you were joking, you guys have only been in a band 14 years. I think you guys are good not to punch each other in the face, because you're not brothers. It seems to only be a brothers thing. If you were brothers, then you're screwed.
Yeah.
You look at the Black Crowes, Oasis, you guys are in deep shit then. But since you're not brothers, you're okay. But like, the guys in Incubus are friends of mine, and we were talking about this. When you take a 5-year break, it reinvigorates you. It reignites your passion. And I think for musicians, especially in this day and age, when you start so young, you kind of have to recommit to it at a point. You find yourself asking again and again, is this something that I really want to do? Because let's say you're, freaking Justin Bieber, and you start when you're 13 years old. You don't know what you do when you're 13 years old, that's what you're going to want to do when you're 35. You have no clue. So for you guys, are there been periods, putting this into a question, where you guys find that sort of reinvigoration and you get really excited for Boxmaster stuff and you find again? And if so, what is it that really reignites you guys to go in and get on a roll for making 2 albums at once, for example?
Well, the one thing about our band, I mean, yes, we've been together 14 years. You know, when we started, we were doing, you know, other stuff. We were mixing hillbilly music with the British invasion, and you know, it was very stylized and very it was a lot of work. You know, it was not how we play naturally. And so, you know, it took us doing this very stylized stuff in order to, you know, go down that path, try those things, and then get into how we play naturally. And the good thing is, you know, as we've gone along and, you know, write songs, it's like we keep pushing it ourselves and we keep doing, you know, more of the stuff ourselves. You know, when we started out, we would, you know, bring in lead guitar players and keyboard players and other folks to, you know, collaborate with us and put parts on it. But for the most part, all the rhythm tracks and vocals and all that was, you know, me and Billy. But as we've gone along, you know, we've gotten to the place where Light Rays, we're the only 2 people on the record. But it still sounds like a band playing, and it still has energy and life and, you know, swings, and really doesn't sound like 2 guys playing music. It sounds like a band playing music. And, you know, that's always what we wanted is, you know, to be in bands or be in a band, you know, since we were 13. We wanted to be in a band with people that, you know, are like-minded and, you know, have something to say and want to grow and at the same time do it exactly how we want to do it. You know, we're not chasing a formula. We're just following inspiration, and, you know, just each song is, you know, kind of the most important thing that we're going to do right then. So it's always like, what is the next song? You know, let's do this one as great as we can, but let's write another song then after that. And, you know, it's always moving forward and always pushing ourselves to be better musicians and better writers and, you know, make better recordings, better productions, everything that we can do to, you know, keep the ball rolling and be able to keep making more music and going out and then playing shows and putting out records and all the stuff that a band wants to do. And thankfully we're, you know, able to keep doing it.
One thing is that we write our songs before we get in the studio. You know, some people will go in the studio and experiment and work on stuff. It gets really expensive. And so we when we go in the studio, we've already gotten fired up about the songs that we're going in to record, because they were songs that were inspired by something and they're written at home. And then JD and I, these days, we used to get together in person at, you know, my place or wherever, and go over them and talk them over and just play them with acoustic guitars and stuff like that. But now we do it on FaceTime. So, you know, or I'll make a video playing a new idea I had, send it to JD and say, hey, what do you think of this? And then he'll say what you can do with it, whatever. And so when we get there, we already know. In other words, let's say we've written 5 or 6 songs, and a couple of them are kind of like, yeah, you know what, those would make good B-sides. We already know that when we get in there. And we pride ourselves on making every song on an album have some impact, you know what I mean? In other words, we don't want to have 2 or 3 good songs and then a bunch of other songs just because you got to have 11, you know? And so we try to, each song, we try to imagine it as the lead song from the record, you know? And whereas if, you know, you could, well, if we put this song first on the album, it would work just as well as that one would or whatever, you know? But we also still sequence our stuff, you know, like you're doing an album, because today's streaming is so popular that maybe it doesn't really matter at the end, but it matters to us. And the good news is that our fans are the same way. So we actually, um, we're not trying to, change anybody's minds out there. They can think whatever they want to think about us. We want the fans who actually believe in the same things and get this, you know what I mean? And some people don't even know they believed it, and then all of a sudden they do, you know. But yeah, I mean, back to your question, I'm no different right now at, let's see, I'm 32. So I'm no different at 32 years old than I was at 11 or 12. I mean, I'm really not. When I saw the Beatles and Ed Sullivan, and before that, when my mom gave me the album King Creole by Elvis, and then the Beatles came and Ed Sullivan, I knew that's all I ever wanted to do. I mean, there was no question about it. And honest to God, that feeling is just as strong today. And maybe because, maybe it's because we haven't become a huge success. Our attitude is like we're teenagers with a band, with a garage band, and we want to be the Beatles someday. So we still, at our age, have that attitude. We don't rest on our laurels, what few there are. I mean, we just don't do it. I mean, we don't have the hundreds of thousands or millions of fans like Bruce Springsteen or anybody like that. Out of the fans we do have around the world, they really love us, and that drives us. And when people compare us in an interview to Big Star, who we love, people have made references to us being like a modern day Big Star and all that kind of thing. And I was raised in that territory where they were from, and all that. And so that's what drives us. It's like that. We still have that thing we had when we were kids. We still have that in us. And we do go back to those days for inspiration. And when people mention that to us, we know we're doing somebody some good. It may not be millions, it may be hundreds or thousands, but that's okay. We're doing it for those people who love that and who love rock and roll, because we're afraid it'll disappear someday. We can't reinvent rock and roll. That's the problem. Some people try. You just have to, you have to honor it. And that's what we're trying to do, is honor rock and roll in our own words.